The blood-red sun hovered on the horizon as Hope Noland urged her mare along the narrow Cliffside trail, the jagged rocks of Redemption Canyon stretching far below her like the teeth of some ancient beast. Arizona Territory, 1885, a land as unforgiving as it was beautiful. Hope had never planned to make this dangerous journey alone, but after her father's sudden passing 3 weeks prior, she had little choice but to continue westward to claim the land he had purchased sight unseen. "Easy, Penny," Hope whispered as loose stones skittered beneath her horse's hooves. The trail had narrowed dangerously, barely wide enough for horse and rider. The wind gusted suddenly, whipping Hope's chestnut hair across her face. Penny, already nervous from the precarious path, startled at a hawk's cry overhead. Everything happened in an instant. Penny reared, Hope's hands slipped on the reins, and suddenly she was falling backward, her body sliding over the cliff edge. A scream tore from her throat as her fingers desperately clawed at the rocky soil, finding one tenuous handhold that left her dangling over the 100-foot drop. "Help!" she cried, knowing the futility of it in this desolate stretch. Her fingers were already weakening, dirt crumbling beneath her grip. This was how she would die at 22, alone in the wilderness. Then she heard the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Hope tried to twist her head to look, but dared not move for fear of losing her grip. "Hold on." A deep voice commanded. Through the curtain of her hair, she glimpsed a man dismounting from a black stallion with practiced speed. He dropped to his stomach at the cliff edge, strong arms reaching down toward her. Their eyes met for the first time, hers wide with terror, his narrowed with determination. He had the weathered face of a man who lived under the open sky, stubbled jaw set with purpose, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Take my hand," he urged, stretching farther. Hope reached with one trembling arm, terrified to release her tenuous grip. Their fingers brushed, missed, then finally clasped together. His grip was iron, calloused palm against hers. "I can't hold on," Hope gasped as more of the ledge crumbled beneath her remaining fingers. "Yes, you can," he insisted, his voice unwavering as he secured his grip. "I've got you now, and I'll never let go." With seemingly impossible strength, he began to pull her upward. Hope scrambled with her feet against the cliff face, finding small footholds that helped her climb as he pulled. With one final heave, he dragged her over the edge, both collapsing onto solid ground. Hope lay trembling beside him, gulping air into her lungs, the reality of her near death slowly registering. The stranger sat up first, removing his hat to reveal dark hair damp with sweat from his exertion. "You all right, miss?" he asked, his breathing as uneven as hers. Hope nodded, unable to find her voice immediately. When she finally looked up at her rescuer, she saw concern etched across his features. "I'm Mitch Morgan," he said, replacing his hat and offering her a canteen. "Most folks call me Mitch." Hope accepted the water with shaking hands. "Hope Noland," she managed after taking a sip. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I would have died if you hadn't come along." Mitch nodded solemnly. "What brings a lady like yourself to this stretch of trail?" "Not exactly known for its hospitality. I'm heading to Silverdale," Hope explained, brushing dirt from her riding skirt. "My father purchased land there. He passed on 3 weeks ago. I'm continuing our journey to claim what's ours." Something flickered in Mitch's eyes. "Silverdale's still another day's ride, and this trail gets worse before it gets better." He stood, extending a hand to help her up. "Your horse took off, but we can catch up to her. She wouldn't have gone far." Hope accepted his help, noticing how her hand seemed small within his. Once standing, she became acutely aware of their proximity, of the lingering touch of his steadying hand at her elbow. "I don't want to impose on your kindness any further, Mr. Morgan," she said, though the thought of continuing alone filled her with dread. "No imposition," Mitch replied, whistling for his horse. "I'm headed to Silverdale myself. Been working at the Miller Ranch these past 5 years. Cattle drives over and I'm headed back." As they mounted his horse together, Hope sitting side saddle in front, while Mitch took the reins, she couldn't help but feel the strange twist of fate. Her father had always warned her about the dangers of the frontier, about trusting strangers. Yet here she was, quite literally placing her life in this cowboy's hands. They found Penny grazing calmly half a mile down the trail, apparently having forgotten her fright entirely. Hope stroked the mare's neck with relief before mounting again. As they continued their journey, the setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape. "We should make camp soon," Mitch observed. "There's a decent spot about a mile ahead with water and shelter." Hope nodded, though anxiety gnawed at her. She had never spent a night in the wilderness with a stranger, let alone a man. Her upbringing in Philadelphia had hardly prepared her for the realities of frontier life. The campsite proved to be a small clearing beside a stream, sheltered by a rocky overhang. Mitch moved with practiced efficiency, gathering firewood and preparing a small campfire while Hope tended to the horses. "You know your way around horses," Mitch commented as he returned with an armful of kindling. "My father insisted I learn before we left Philadelphia," Hope explained. "Said a woman heading west needed to be self-sufficient." "Smart man," Mitch said, arranging the wood. "Most folks who come west unprepared don't last long." The fire crackled to life under his skilled hands, and soon the smell of coffee filled the air. From his saddlebags, Mitch produced jerky and hardtack. It was a simple meal, but after her ordeal, Hope found herself ravenous. As darkness fell completely, the vastness of the night sky revealed itself in all its splendor. Hope had never seen stars so numerous or so bright. "It's magnificent," she breathed, gazing upward. Mitch followed her gaze. "Never gets old," he agreed. After a moment of companionable silence, he asked, "What kind of land did your father purchase?" "A homestead with a creek running through it," Hope said. "He dreamed of starting a horse farm. Said the water access made it prime property." Mitch's expression changed subtly. "A creek property near Silverdale?" "Yes, about 5 miles south, according to the deed." "Why do you ask?" He hesitated before answering. "No reason, just curious." But something in his tone suggested otherwise. Hope studied him across the fire. "Mr. Morgan, if there's something I should know about this property, call me Mitch," he interrupted. "And no, nothing specific. Land around here changes hands pretty regular. Some work out, some don't." Hope wasn't convinced by his casual tone, but exhaustion was overtaking her. Mitch arranged her bedroll beneath the overhang, a respectful distance from his own. "Get some rest," he advised. "We'll head out at first light." Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Every sound of the wilderness, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustling of nocturnal creatures startled her awake. During one such moment, she found Mitch sitting upright, rifle across his lap as he scanned the darkness. "You should be sleeping," he said without looking her way. "So should you," Hope countered. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Fair enough, but I'm used to keeping watch." "Are there dangers I should be worried about?" "Nothing specific," Mitch replied. "Just good practice out here. Animals mostly keep to themselves if you don't surprise them." "And people?" Hope asked. Mitch's expression grew more serious. "Most folks out here are just trying to make their way, same as us. But like anywhere, there are those who take what isn't theirs." The frank assessment should have frightened her, but somehow his steady presence was reassuring. Hope found herself studying his profile in the dying firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the watchful eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Why did you help me today?" she asked suddenly. "You could have ridden past." Mitch looked at her then, surprise evident in his expression. "That's not a question that needs asking, Miss Noland." "Hope," she corrected. "And I think it does. The world isn't always kind." "No," he agreed, "it isn't. But a man who'd ride past a person in need isn't worth the horse he's sitting on." He poked at the embers with a stick. "My father taught me that much before he died." There was something in the way he said it that suggested a story there, but Hope didn't press. Instead, she found herself saying, "My father was all I had. My mother died when I was 12. When he decided to come west, I had no choice but to follow. And now I have this deed and his dream," Hope said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I don't know the first thing about starting a horse farm, but I aim to try." Mitch nodded slowly. "Takes grit to admit what you don't know, but try anyway. That counts for something out here." Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and Hope drifted to sleep with the sound of the stream and Mitch's occasional movements as he kept watch. Morning came with birdsong and the scent of fresh coffee. Hope opened her eyes to find Mitch already up, tending a small fire with a pot of coffee brewing. Her body ached from yesterday's ordeal, but she forced herself to rise. "Morning," Mitch greeted, handing her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "How are you feeling?" "Like I fell off a cliff," Hope replied with a small smile, "but alive thanks to you." They ate a quick breakfast of the remaining provisions before breaking camp. As they rode, the landscape gradually changed, the barren cliffs giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional cluster of trees. Hope found herself relaxing into the journey, occasionally stealing glances at her stoic companion. "Can I ask you something, Mitch?" she ventured after they'd been riding for several hours. "Seems like you just did," he replied, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. Hope laughed despite herself. "Fair enough, I was wondering what brought you west." Mitch was silent for so long that Hope thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "War ended. Home didn't feel much like home anymore. You fought for the Union." Hope asked, immediately regretting the question. Even 20 years after the war's end, it remained a sensitive topic. "Yes," he answered simply. "Came home to Kentucky to find my family gone. Fever took them while I was away. Figured there wasn't much keeping me there, so I headed west like so many others." "I'm sorry," Hope said softly. Mitch shrugged. "It was a long time ago. Found a different kind of life out here." He glanced at her. "What about you? Philadelphia's a far cry from Arizona territory." "My father was a bookkeeper," Hope explained. "He spent his life working with numbers, recording other people's fortunes and businesses. I think he always dreamed of something more tangible. When my mother passed, something in him changed. He started reading everything he could about the West, about ranching and farming." "Not exactly preparation for the real thing," Mitch observed. "No," Hope agreed, "but he was determined. Saved for years to buy land. We were almost to Silverdale when his heart gave out." She swallowed hard. "3 weeks ago, I buried him beneath a cottonwood tree near the Gila River." Mitch removed his hat briefly, a gesture of respect that touched Hope deeply. "Man with a dream like that deserves to have it carried on," he said quietly. By mid-afternoon, they crested a rise and Mitch reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, pointing to a small settlement in the valley below. "Silverdale." From this distance, Silverdale didn't look like much. A main street with perhaps 24 buildings, a church steeple rising above the rest. Scattered homesteads dotted the surrounding landscape. "It's smaller than I expected," Hope admitted. "Most places out here are," Mitch replied. "But it's a decent town. Good people mostly." As they rode down into the valley, Hope felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. This was to be her home now, this unfamiliar place so far from everything she'd known. The main street was dusty but orderly. A general store, saloon, blacksmith, and various other establishments lined the way. People stopped to watch as they rode past, curiosity evident in their expressions. "Word travels fast in small towns," Mitch explained, noticing her discomfort under the scrutiny. "They're just wondering who the new face is." They stopped first at the land office, a small building next to the sheriff's office. The clerk, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, examined Hope's deed with careful attention. "Everything appears to be in order, Miss Noland," he said finally. "The property is about 5 miles south of town, as noted here. Pleasant Valley, it's called locally." "Can you tell me about the previous owner?" Hope asked. The clerk glanced briefly at Mitch before answering. "Fellow named Ellis owned it for a spell, left about a year ago. Property's been vacant since." "Left? Why?" Hope pressed. "Folks come and go out here," the clerk said vaguely. "Will you be staying in town tonight? Mrs. Whitaker runs a boarding house, very respectable establishment for a lady traveling alone." Hope glanced at Mitch. "Actually, I'd like to see the property today if possible." "I can take you there," Mitch offered. "Still plenty of daylight left." The clerk nodded. "Just follow the south road out of town, past the creek crossing. You'll see a stand of cottonwoods marking the entrance to the valley." Back outside, Hope noticed Mitch's pensive expression. "You've been to this property before, haven't you?" she asked directly. Mitch adjusted his hat. "Yes," he admitted. "I've ridden past it a few times. And what aren't you telling me?" he sighed. "Let's get supplies first. You'll need provisions if you're planning to stay out there tonight." At the general store, Mitch helped Hope select essential supplies: flour, coffee, beans, salt pork, and other necessities. The proprietor, a friendly woman named Mrs. Turner, seemed delighted to meet Hope. "We don't get many new residents," she explained as she wrapped their purchases. "Especially young ladies on their own. You'll cause quite a stir among the unmarried men hereabouts." Hope felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not looking for a husband, Mrs. Turner, just trying to make my father's dream a reality." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Turner said with a knowing smile. "But dreams have a way of changing out here." Her gaze flickered briefly to Mitch, who was examining a display of tools with great interest. With supplies loaded, they headed south out of town. The tension in Mitch's shoulders was evident as they approached their destination. "Whatever it is you're not telling me, now would be the time," Hope said firmly. Mitch slowed his horse. "The property you bought, Pleasant Valley, it's good land, water year-round, decent soil, but there's been trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The Miller Ranch where I work borders your land to the west. There's been a dispute over water rights. The creek that runs through your property feeds into Miller's grazing land. Last owner Ellis tried to dam it up to create a pond, nearly caused a range war." Hope's stomach tightened. "And my father bought this disputed property." "Your father probably didn't know," Mitch said. "Land office doesn't always share the full history, but yes, that's what you're riding into." Hope was silent for a long moment, processing this unwelcome information. "Is that why you helped me yesterday? Because you knew who I was?" Mitch looked genuinely offended. "I helped you because you were about to fall to your death, had nothing to do with who you were or weren't." Hope regretted the accusation immediately. "I'm sorry, that was unfair." "Yes, it was," Mitch agreed, but his expression softened. "Look, I understand your suspicion, but if I had any agenda, I wouldn't be telling you about the water dispute now." They continued in silence until they reached the stand of cottonwoods the clerk had mentioned. Beyond them, a small valley opened up, cradled by gentle hills. A creek wound through the center, its banks lined with vegetation greener than the surrounding landscape. Near the creek stood a simple cabin, weathered but seemingly solid. "This is it," Mitch said unnecessarily. Hope reined in her horse, taking in what was now her home. Despite the troubling information about the water dispute, she couldn't help but feel a sense of rightness. This was what her father had dreamed of, this peaceful valley with its life-giving water. They approached the cabin cautiously. Mitch dismounted first, hand resting on his revolver as he checked the interior. "All clear," he called after a moment. The cabin was simple, one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a bed frame in the corner, and some basic shelving. A layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise it seemed in reasonable condition. "Previous owner left in a hurry," Mitch observed, running a finger through the dust on the table. "Left most of his furnishings." Hope moved to the single window, wiping away grime to look out at the valley that was now hers. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Yes, it is," Mitch agreed, coming to stand beside her. "Good horse country, too. Your father chose well, dispute aside." "What am I going to do about that?" Hope asked. "I don't want to start my new life in the middle of a range war." "Talk to Miller directly," Mitch suggested. "He's a reasonable man most days, might be able to work out an arrangement that benefits you both." Hope nodded, grateful for the advice. "Will you introduce me?" "I can," Mitch said. "But not today. It's getting late, and we should get this place habitable if you're planning to stay tonight." They worked together for the next few hours. Mitch repaired a broken hinge on the door while Hope swept and dusted the interior. He chopped firewood while she arranged her supplies and made the bed with the linens she'd purchased in town. By sunset, the cabin had transformed from an abandoned shell to something resembling a home. As darkness fell, they sat on the cabin's small porch, eating a simple meal of beans and salt pork that Hope had prepared over the fireplace. "Thank you," Hope said, breaking the comfortable silence, "for everything, not just saving my life, but for this too." She gestured to the cabin and the work they'd done. Mitch nodded, accepting her gratitude with characteristic reserve. "What's your plan now? Get settled. Learn what I need to know about raising horses. Try to resolve this water dispute peacefully," Hope said, ticking off the immediate tasks. "After that, I suppose I'll figure it out as I go." "That's generally how it works out here," Mitch agreed. He hesitated before continuing. "I should be heading back to the ranch tonight. Miller expects me back from the cattle drive." Hope felt a surprising pang of disappointment at the thought of his departure. In just one day, his steady presence had become a comfort in this unfamiliar territory. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "You've done more than enough already." Mitch studied her face in the fading light. "I could come back tomorrow," he offered. "Help you get more settled, maybe ride with you to meet Miller." Hope smiled, unable to hide her relief. "I'd appreciate that," Mitch nodded, standing to gather his belongings. "I'll be back mid-morning then." As he mounted his horse, Hope called out, "Mitch, I meant what I said. Thank you for saving my life." In the deepening twilight, she couldn't be sure, but she thought she saw a smile cross his face. "Get some rest, Hope. Lock the door behind me." After he rode away, Hope sat alone on the porch for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home, the gentle gurgle of the creek, the chorus of crickets, the occasional distant howl of a coyote. For the first time since her father's death, she felt something like peace. This was his dream, yes, but perhaps it could become hers too. When she finally went inside and latched the door, Hope fell into an exhausted sleep on the bed that was now hers, in the cabin that was now hers, on the land that was now hers, disputed creek and all. True to his word, Mitch returned the next morning, bringing with him a young apple tree sapling. "First thing any homestead needs," he explained as Hope watched him dig a hole near the cabin. "Won't bear fruit for a few years, but that's frontier thinking, planning for a future you might not see." Hope was touched by the gesture and its implicit faith in her staying power. "That's a lovely tradition," she said, helping him settle the sapling into the ground. "My mother taught me that," Mitch said. "She planted an apple tree at every home we ever had." Said a place isn't really yours until you've grown something there. After the tree was planted, Mitch helped Hope reinforce a broken section of the corral near the cabin. His hands were sure and skilled with tools, and Hope found herself watching him work more than strictly necessary. "You've done this before," she observed. "Few times," Mitch replied with that ghost of a smile she was coming to recognize. "Ranch work is mostly fixing what's broken before something else breaks." By midday, they had accomplished more than Hope could have managed alone in a week. She prepared a simple lunch and they ate beneath the shade of the cottonwoods. "Tell me about Miller," Hope said as they finished eating. "What kind of man is he?" "Fair, mostly," Mitch answered. "Built his ranch from nothing 20 years ago, protective of what's his but not unreasonable." His problem was with Ellis, not the land itself. "And Ellis tried to dam the creek, without warning or discussion," Mitch confirmed. "Miller depends on that water for his cattle during dry spells, would have devastated his herd." Hope nodded thoughtfully. "I have no intention of damming anything, I just want to raise horses." "That might make all the difference," Mitch said. "Miller respects straight talk and honest intentions." They rode out to the Miller ranch that afternoon. It was a substantial operation, a large main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals filled with cattle. As they approached, Hope felt a flicker of nervousness. This neighboring rancher could make her life difficult if he chose to. George Miller proved to be a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a graying beard and piercing blue eyes. He emerged from the barn as they rode up, recognition lighting his face when he saw Mitch. "Morgan, wondered when you'd show up. Drive go smooth?" His gaze shifted to Hope, curiosity evident. Mitch dismounted, gesturing for Hope to do the same. "Smooth enough, Mr. Miller. This is Hope Noland. She's the new owner of Pleasant Valley." Miller's expression changed immediately, becoming more guarded. Ellis's old place, heard someone had bought it. Hope stepped forward, extending her hand. "Mr. Miller, I understand there's been some dispute over water rights. I wanted to introduce myself properly and assure you I have no intention of disrupting the natural flow of the creek." Miller seemed surprised by her directness but shook her hand firmly. "Appreciate the courtesy, Miss Noland. Not many would bother." "I'm planning to raise horses," Hope continued. "My father purchased the land before his passing. It was his dream." Something in Miller's expression softened at the mention of her father. "Sorry for your loss," he said. "Come inside, we can talk more comfortably there." The main house was spacious and well-appointed, signs of prosperity earned through hard work. A woman Hope assumed was Mrs. Miller greeted them warmly, insisting on serving coffee and fresh baked bread. "So horses," Miller said once they were seated at the large dining table. "That's a different proposition than what Ellis had in mind." "What exactly was his plan?" Hope asked. Miller exchanged a glance with Mitch. "Said he was going to start a commercial fishing operation, wanted to dam the creek to make ponds. Nonsense idea for this climate, but he was determined." "That explains the conflict," Hope said. "I assure you, Mr. Miller, all I need is enough water for my horses and perhaps a small vegetable garden. The creek can continue flowing to your grazing land unimpeded." Miller studied her for a long moment. "You seem like a sensible woman, Miss Noland." "I'm willing to put the past dispute aside and start fresh." He looked at Mitch. "Morgan here can attest that I'm a man of my word." "He is," Mitch confirmed. "Both ways." Miller nodded in acknowledgement. "Then let's consider it settled. You leave the creek flowing naturally and we'll have no quarrel." Relief washed over Hope. One major obstacle overcome. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. I value good neighbors." "Speaking of neighbors," Mrs. Miller interjected, "we're having a gathering here Saturday next. Nothing formal, just folks from around the area getting together for a meal and some music. You should come, Hope, meet more of the community." "I'd like that," Hope said, genuinely pleased by the invitation. As they prepared to leave, Miller took Mitch aside for a private word while Hope thanked Mrs. Miller for her hospitality. Outside, as they mounted their horses, Hope noticed a thoughtful expression on Mitch's face. "Everything all right?" she asked once they were on the trail back to her cabin. "Miller offered me a new position," Mitch said. "Foreman of the east section. It would mean having my own cabin on the property instead of the bunkhouse." "That's wonderful," Hope exclaimed. "A promotion, isn't it?" "Yes," Mitch agreed. "Been working toward it for a while. Will you take it?" "Told him I would," Mitch replied. "East section borders your property. I'd be your closest neighbor." Hope felt a flutter in her chest at this news. "Well, that's convenient if I need any help, I mean." Mitch's eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Exactly." The next few days fell into a pattern. Mitch would arrive in the morning, help with whatever project Hope had identified as most pressing, then return to the Miller ranch in the evening. Together they repaired the cabin's roof, cleared the overgrown garden plot, and began rehabilitating the corral fencing. "You need horses to fill this corral," Mitch observed on the fourth day as they completed the repairs. "I know," Hope said, wiping sweat from her brow. "But good breeding stock is expensive, and I need to be careful with my funds." "Miller might have some ideas," Mitch suggested. "He keeps a few decent horses among his cattle." That evening, instead of leaving at sundown as usual, Mitch stayed to help Hope prepare dinner. The domesticity of it wasn't lost on either of them, Mitch cutting vegetables while Hope kneaded dough for biscuits. "You're good at this," Hope commented, watching him work. "When you spend enough time on the trail, you learn to cook or you eat poorly," Mitch replied. "Nothing fancy, but it's edible." "Better than what I managed in Philadelphia," Hope admitted. "My father hired a housekeeper after my mother died. I never learned much about cooking until we started west." As they ate together at the small table, Hope realized how comfortable she'd become in Mitch's presence. His quiet strength and reliability had become a constant in her new life, something she found herself looking forward to each day. "The social at Miller's is tomorrow," she said, breaking a companionable silence. "It is," Mitch agreed. "Planning to go?" "Yes, Mrs. Miller was kind to invite me." Hope hesitated. "Will you be there?" Miller gave all the hands the evening off, so yes. He glanced up from his plate. "Could ride together if you like. It's a fair distance." Hope nodded, perhaps too quickly. "I'd appreciate that." The next evening, Hope found herself more nervous than she'd expected as she prepared for the social. She'd brought few dresses west, focusing on practical clothing, but had managed to save one decent blue dress for special occasions. She put it on now, along with the simple silver locket that had been her mother's. When Mitch arrived, she noticed he'd made efforts with his appearance as well. His usual trail clothes had been replaced with clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a vest. He'd even trimmed his beard. "You look nice," he said simply when he saw her. "Thank you," Hope replied, feeling a warmth in her cheeks. "So do you." The ride to the Miller ranch passed quickly, filled with easy conversation. Hope found herself laughing at Mitch's dry observations about frontier life and the characters they might encounter at the social. The gathering was larger than Hope had anticipated. Lanterns hung from trees illuminated the yard where tables had been set up laden with food. A small group of musicians played lively tunes on fiddles and guitars, and several couples were already dancing in a cleared area. Mrs. Miller spotted them immediately and hurried over. "Hope. So glad you could come, and Mitch, don't you clean up handsomely?" She took Hope's arm. "Come along, dear, there are so many people for you to meet." Hope glanced back at Mitch as Mrs. Miller led her away. He gave her a reassuring nod before making his way toward a group of ranch hands. The next hour passed in a whirl of introductions. Hope met the town doctor and his wife, the school teacher, the blacksmith, and numerous other residents. Everyone seemed genuinely welcoming, curious about her plans for the valley property. "Horse breeding is ambitious," commented the blacksmith, a burly man named Thomas. "But if you need any work done, I'm happy to help. Proper shoes make all the difference." "Thank you," Hope said sincerely. "I'll certainly need your expertise once I acquire my first horses." As the evening progressed, Hope found herself enjoying the community's warmth. It was so different from Philadelphia society with its rigid formality. Here, a ranch hand could share a table with the town's wealthiest merchant without anyone raising an eyebrow. She was speaking with the general store owner when she felt a presence at her elbow. Turning, she found Mitch standing there. "Sorry to interrupt," he said politely. "I wondered if Miss Noland might care to dance." Hope felt a flutter of surprise and pleasure. "I'd like that," she said, excusing herself from the conversation. Mitch led her to the dancing area where several couples were already moving to a lively tune. "I should warn you," he said quietly, "I'm not much of a dancer." "That makes two of us," Hope replied with a smile. "We can be ungraceful together." Despite his warning, Mitch proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her through the steps with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything else. Hope was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the other clasping hers firmly but gently. "Everyone's been so welcoming," Hope said as they moved among the other dancers. "It's not what I expected." "Frontier communities tend to stick together," Mitch explained. "Life's hard enough without making enemies of your neighbors." "Is that why you warned me about the water dispute?" "To avoid making an enemy of Miller," Mitch's expression grew serious. "I warned you because you deserved to know what you were walking into, and yes, because starting fresh in a new place is hard enough without conflict." The music changed to a slower tune and couples around them drew closer together. Mitch hesitated for just a moment before adjusting his hold, their bodies now separated by mere inches. "You've been very kind to me, Mitch," Hope said softly. "I don't know how I would have managed these past days without your help." "You'd have managed," he replied with certainty. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." "Perhaps," Hope conceded, "but I'm glad I didn't have to find out." Their eyes met and held, and for a moment, Hope thought he might say something more. Instead, his gaze dropped to her lips briefly before he looked away, a muscle working in his jaw. When the dance ended, Mitch excused himself to get them drinks. Hope watched him walk away, her heart beating faster than the exertion of dancing warranted. "He's a good man," came a voice beside her. Hope turned to find Mrs. Miller watching her with knowing eyes. "Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but solid as they come." "Yes, he's been very helpful," Hope said neutrally. Mrs. Miller smiled. "In the 5 years he's worked for my husband, I've never seen him bring a woman to one of our gatherings, or dance, for that matter." Before Hope could respond to this revelation, Mitch returned with 2 cups of punch. Mrs. Miller gave Hope a meaningful look before moving on to speak with other guests. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, with more dancing, good food, and conversation. By the time they began the ride home, the moon was high overhead, casting silver light across the landscape. "Thank you for escorting me," Hope said as they rode side by side. "I enjoyed myself more than I expected to." "Good," Mitch replied simply. "These folks will be your neighbors for years to come. Important to start off right." "Years to come," Hope repeated thoughtfully. "It's strange to think that far ahead. A week ago, I was still in shock from my father's death, just trying to get through each day. And now," Hope considered the question, "now I'm starting to see possibilities. For the first time, I'm thinking about what I want, not just what my father wanted." "And what do you want, Hope?" Mitch asked, his voice quiet in the darkness. "To build something lasting," she answered honestly. "To wake up each morning with purpose, to create a home, not just a place to live." She glanced at him. "What about you? What does Mitchell Morgan want from life?" Mitch was silent for so long that Hope thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Much the same, I suppose. A place of my own eventually. Purpose. Maybe something I couldn't find after the war peace, I guess." When they reached her cabin, Mitch dismounted to help her down, his hands strong at her waist. Neither moved away immediately after her feet touched the ground, standing close in the moonlight. "Thank you again," Hope said softly, looking up at him. "My pleasure," Mitch replied, his voice equally quiet for a heartbeat. Hope thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should go. Got an early start tomorrow, moving my things to the foreman's cabin." "Of course," Hope said, ignoring the twinge of disappointment. "Good night, Mitch." "Good night, Hope," he replied, mounting his horse. "Lock your door." Hope watched him ride away before entering her cabin. As she prepared for bed, she found herself replaying the evening in her mind, the dancing, the conversations, the moment outside when they'd stood so close. She had known Mitch for less than a week, yet somehow he had become important to her in a way she hadn't anticipated. The next day, Hope threw herself into work around the property, trying not to watch the trail for Mitch's approach. By mid-afternoon, when he hadn't appeared, she told herself it was natural he was moving into his new quarters, taking on new responsibilities. She had no claim on his time. Still, the cabin felt oddly empty without his steady presence. Just before sunset, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Hope stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the setting sun to see Mitch riding toward her, leading a second horse, a beautiful chestnut mare. "Evening," he called as he approached. "Sorry I'm late, had some business to attend to." Hope descended the porch steps, her attention drawn to the mare. "She's beautiful," she said, stroking the horse's nose gently. "Thought you might think so," Mitch replied, dismounting. "Miller's selling off some stock to make room for new breeding bulls. This one's got good bloodlines, good temperament, would make a fine start to a breeding program." Hope looked at him in surprise. "Are you suggesting I buy her?" "Already did," Mitch said, handing her the reins. "Consider it a housewarming gift, or a business investment if that sits better." Hope was momentarily speechless. "Mitch, I can't accept such an expensive gift." "You can and you will," he replied firmly. "She's the best of the lot and Miller gave me a good price. If it makes you feel better, you can pay me back once your farm starts turning a profit." Hope stroked the mare's neck, emotion welling up unexpectedly. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll name her something dignified," Mitch suggested with a small smile. "Ranch hands were calling her Red, which lacks imagination." Hope laughed, blinking back tears. "I'll think of something better, I promise." She looked up at him. "Thank you, Mitch, truly," he nodded, seeming almost embarrassed by her gratitude. "She'll need proper accommodations. Thought we might work on reinforcing the stable tomorrow if you're agreeable." "Of course," Hope said, leading the mare toward the corral. "I can't believe I'm officially a horse farmer now. One horse doesn't make a farm," Mitch pointed out, "but it's a start." As they settled the mare in the corral, providing fresh water and feed, Hope found herself watching Mitch, the gentle way he handled the animal, the confidence in his movements. When he caught her looking, she didn't look away. "What?" he asked. "Why are you doing all this?" Hope asked directly. "Helping me, buying me a horse. You barely know me." Mitch straightened, dusting off his hands. "I know enough," he said simply. "What does that mean?" He met her gaze steadily. "It means I know you're brave enough to continue alone after your father died. Smart enough to address the water dispute head-on instead of ignoring it. Kind enough to thank every person who's helped you since you arrived." He paused. "And determined enough to make this work, against considerable odds." Hope felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words. "Those are generous assessments. Just observations," Mitch replied. "As for why I'm helping," he shrugged. "Maybe I believe in what you're trying to do here, or maybe I just like the company." There was something in his tone, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Hope took a step closer to him. "I like the company too," she said softly. For a moment they stood there, the air between them charged with unspoken possibility. Then Mitch cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "I should head back," he said. "Early start tomorrow. Miller wants me to ride the boundary lines, check for breaks in the fencing." Hope nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course, will I see you tomorrow?" "Count on it," Mitch replied. "Need to get that stable shored up for your new investment." After he left, Hope spent time with the mare, already forming ideas for her farm. One horse was indeed just a beginning, but it represented something profound, a concrete step toward making this place truly hers. She named the mare Destiny, which seemed fitting for her first acquisition in this new life. The next few weeks settled into a pleasant rhythm. Mitch would come by most days, helping with various projects around the property. Together, they repaired the stable, cleared more land for future pastures, and even planted a small vegetable garden near the cabin. Hope found herself looking forward to his visits with increasing anticipation. Their conversations flowed easily now, ranging from practical discussions about the farm to more personal exchanges about their pasts and hopes for the future. "Did you always want to be a rancher?" Hope asked one afternoon as they worked side by side, mending a section of fence. No, Mitch admitted. Before the war, I thought I might study law. My mother's brother was a lawyer in Lexington, offered to take me on as a clerk. What changed? Everything, Mitch said simply. War has a way of reshuffling your priorities. When I came back and found my family gone, law didn't seem important anymore. Hope nodded in understanding. And now, do you still want your own ranch someday? Maybe, Mitch replied. The foreman position at Miller's is a good step in that direction. Allows me to save more, learn the business side of things. He glanced at her. What about you? Was this farm always your dream or just your father's? Hope considered the question seriously. It was his dream initially, she acknowledged. But now, I'm starting to see the appeal more clearly. There's something satisfying about building something with your own hands, watching it grow. There is, Mitch agreed. That's what drew me to ranching after the war, concrete results. You put in the work, you see the outcome. As the days passed, Hope began to feel more confident in her new role. She acquired 2 more horses, a gelding named Scout that Mitch helped her select at an auction in town, and a pregnant mare named Belle from a rancher north of Silverdale. Her small herd was growing, as was her knowledge of horse husbandry. Mitch proved to be an invaluable teacher, patient with her questions and generous with his knowledge. He never made her feel foolish for what she didn't know, instead showing genuine respect for how quickly she learned. One evening, about a month after Hope's arrival in Silverdale, they sat on her porch watching the sunset after a long day of work. Mitch had helped her construct a new watering trough that day, and both were pleasantly tired from the labor. Miller mentioned a horse auction in Tucson next month, Mitch said as they sipped coffee. Some good breeding stock coming up from Mexico might be worth considering if you're looking to expand. I'd like that, Hope replied, though I should be careful not to overextend myself financially. Smart thinking, Mitch agreed. Building slowly is better than growing too fast and losing it all. Hope smiled at his approval. My father would have bought every horse at the auction. He was always more enthusiastic than practical. Sounds like an interesting man, Mitch observed. Would have liked to meet him. He would have liked you, Hope said with certainty. He valued honesty and hard work above all else. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching as the sky transformed from blue to orange to deep purple. Stars began appearing, first one by one, then in constellations. I never get tired of this view, Hope said softly. Nor I, Mitch agreed, though when she glanced over, she found him looking at her rather than the sky. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Hope felt her heart quicken as Mitch set his coffee cup aside and turned more fully toward her. Hope, he began, his voice lower than usual. I've been meaning to say. The sound of approaching riders cut him off. Both stood quickly, Mitch's hand moving instinctively to his revolver as 3 horsemen appeared in the failing light. Evening, folks, called the lead rider as they approached. Hope we're not interrupting. Mitch relaxed slightly as he recognized the visitors. Sheriff Wilson, he acknowledged. What brings you out this way? The sheriff, a weathered man in his 40s, dismounted with a grunt. Evening, Morgan, Miss Noland. He nodded to Hope. Hate to disturb you, but we're tracking some cattle rustlers. Hit the Peterson place last night, took a dozen head. Thought they might have come this direction. Haven't seen any strange riders, Hope said, concerned by the news. Or cattle, for that matter, the sheriff nodded. Figured as much, but had to check. Been a rash of thefts lately. Folks should keep an eye out, especially those with smaller holdings. Easier targets. Hope glanced at her small corral where her 3 horses were visible in the twilight. Should I be worried about my horses? Wouldn't hurt to be cautious, the sheriff advised. Good locks, maybe keep a lantern burning at night. Most thieves prefer darkness and empty properties. I'll ride a wider patrol around this area, Mitch added. Let Miller know too. The sheriff thanked them and departed with his deputies, continuing their search. After they'd gone, the easy mood of earlier had vanished, replaced by a new tension. I should get back, Mitch said, though he seemed reluctant. Early rounds tomorrow. Hope nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Whatever Mitch had been about to say before the interruption would remain unsaid, at least for now. Be careful riding back, she said. Given what the sheriff said. Always am, Mitch assured her. And you keep that rifle I showed you how to use close at hand, just in case. Hope promised she would, watching as he mounted his horse. Before riding away, he hesitated. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said. "Make sure everything's secure here." "I'd appreciate that," Hope replied, meaning it. After he left, Hope went through the motions of securing the cabin for the night, checking the locks and keeping the rifle within reach as Mitch had advised. The sheriff's warning had disturbed her more than she wanted to admit. She had only just begun to feel at home here. The thought that thieves might threaten what she was building was unsettling. Sleep came fitfully that night, every sound from outside causing her to start awake. By morning, she was exhausted but determined not to let fear dictate her actions. She had chores to complete, horses to tend to, a life to build. Mitch arrived earlier than usual, concern evident in his expression as he dismounted. "Everything all right here, fine," Hope assured him. "No unwelcome visitors in the night." Relief crossed his features. "Good." "Rode the perimeter of your property before coming in. No sign of anyone having passed through recently." Hope appreciated his thoroughness. "Thank you for checking. I admit the sheriff's warning left me uneasy." "It's wise to be cautious," Mitch said, "but don't let it consume you. Most rustlers focus on cattle more valuable in numbers. 3 horses aren't likely to draw much attention." His words were reassuring, and Hope felt some of her tension ease. They spent the morning reinforcing the corral gate with a sturdier lock, then rode the property boundary together, Mitch pointing out natural features she could use as landmarks. "If you know your land well, you'll notice anything out of place," he explained as they paused atop a small rise overlooking the valley. "That's half the battle." Hope nodded, taking in the vista before them, her creek winding through the valley, the cabin and stables, the grazing area where her horses now roamed. Despite the previous night's worries, she felt a surge of pride and attachment to this place that was becoming truly hers. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Yes, it is," Mitch agreed, his gaze taking in the same view. "You've done well here, Hope. In just a month, you've accomplished more than most newcomers do in a year." His praise warmed her. "I've had help," she pointed out, glancing at him. "Quite a lot of it." Mitch smiled slightly. "You'd have managed, perhaps," Hope acknowledged. "But I'm glad I didn't have to." Their eyes met and held, and Hope felt that same charge in the air that had been present the previous evening before the sheriff's arrival. This time there were no interruptions, no approaching riders. Mitch moved his horse closer to hers, the animals standing side by side now. "Hope," he began again, his voice carrying the same quiet intensity as before. "I've been meaning to say something for a while now." Hope's heart quickened. "Yes, I don't want you to feel any obligation," he continued carefully, "and if I'm speaking out of turn, just say so and we'll never mention it again." "Mitch," Hope said gently, "just say what you need to say." He took a deep breath. "I care for you," he said simply, "more than I expected to. More than might be proper given how short a time we've known each other." Joy bloomed in Hope's chest at his words. "I care for you too," she admitted. "And I don't give a fig for what's proper anymore. Life's too unpredictable out here to waste time on such concerns." A slow smile spread across Mitch's face, transforming his usually serious expression. "That's a practical outlook." "I'm becoming a practical woman," Hope replied, returning his smile. "A month in the Arizona territory will do that." Mitch reached across the space between their horses, taking her hand in his. "I don't want to rush you," he said, "or complicate your life when you're just getting established here, but I wanted you to know where I stand." Hope squeezed his hand. "You haven't complicated anything, Mitch. If anything, you've made everything clearer." They rode back to the cabin hand in hand, a new understanding between them. That evening, as they sat on the porch together, Mitch finally kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that deepened when Hope responded eagerly. It felt right, as if they had been moving toward this moment since he had pulled her from the cliff edge. Over the following weeks, their relationship blossomed alongside Hope's growing farm. Mitch still maintained his duties at the Miller Ranch, but he spent most of his free time at Pleasant Valley, helping with projects and simply enjoying Hope's company. Word traveled quickly in the small community, as it always did. Mrs. Miller beamed with satisfaction when she saw them together at church, while Mrs. Turner at the general store began asking pointed questions about future plans. Hope took the good-natured teasing in stride, too happy to be bothered by the town's interest in her personal life. The cattle rustling that had concerned the sheriff continued sporadically throughout the region, though Hope's property remained untouched. Mitch worried nonetheless, often riding over after his duties at Miller's just to check on her before returning to his cabin. "You don't need to make the extra trip every night," Hope told him one evening as he prepared to leave. "I'm fine, truly." "Humor me," Mitch replied, pulling her close for a goodbye kiss. "I'll sleep better knowing you're safe." 2 months after Hope's arrival in Silverdale, the horse auction in Tucson that Mitch had mentioned was approaching. Hope had been carefully saving and planning, determined to add to her small herd with quality breeding stock. "Miller's sending me to bid on some bulls," Mitch told her as they discussed the upcoming trip. "We could travel together." Hope agreed readily. The thought of the 2-day journey with Mitch was appealing, as was the prospect of the larger town and the auction itself. They set out early on a Tuesday morning, planning to reach a way station by nightfall. The journey was pleasant, the autumn weather mild and the trail clear. They talked easily as they rode, discussing their plans for the auction and enjoying the changing landscape. The way station proved to be a simple affair, a main building with a small dining room and a handful of basic rooms for travelers. After securing their horses, they took a room each, though Hope found herself wishing for less propriety and more privacy. The dining room was crowded with other travelers, most headed to the same auction. Mitch and Hope found a small table in the corner, grateful for the hot meal after a long day's ride. "Miller's given me a budget for 3 bulls," Mitch explained as they ate. "But there's a specific bloodline he's after. If I can't find it, I'm to come back with the money rather than settle for less." "Wise approach," Hope commented. "I'm hoping to find at least one more breeding mare, maybe a stallion if the price is right." As they discussed the merits of various horse breeds, Hope noticed a group of men at a nearby table watching them with uncomfortable intensity. She leaned closer to Mitch. "Don't look now, but I think we're being observed." Mitch casually shifted position to get a better view of the men in question. His expression remained neutral, but Hope saw recognition flicker in his eyes. "Know them?" she asked quietly. "Not personally," Mitch replied, keeping his voice low, "but I've seen 2 of them around Silverdale." "Drifters? Odd jobs, mostly. Nothing concerning, but keep your door locked tonight." Hope nodded, trying not to let apprehension take hold. The frontier was full of transient workers. There was nothing inherently suspicious about their presence here. Still, she was glad when they finished their meal and could retire to their rooms. Mitch walked her to her door, checking the lock before bidding her good night with a lingering kiss. "Sleep well," he said. "Big day tomorrow." Hope did sleep well despite her earlier concerns. By morning, the men who had watched them were gone, apparently having left before dawn. Mitch and Hope broke their fast quickly and continued toward Tucson, hoping to arrive by mid-afternoon. The auction proved to be a lively affair, with buyers from as far away as Texas competing for the best stock. Hope watched carefully as various horses were presented, making notes on those that interested her. Mitch found his bulls early. 2 of the 3 Miller had requested and secured them at a reasonable price. With his primary task accomplished, he stayed close to Hope, offering observations about the horses that caught her eye. "That one," he said, nodding toward a 3-year-old stallion with a gleaming black coat. "Good conformation, strong hindquarters, would cross well with your mares." Hope had noticed the same horse. "He's beautiful," she agreed, "but likely to go for more than I can afford." To her surprise, when the stallion came up for bidding, the competition was less fierce than expected. Hope found herself the proud owner of a magnificent breeding stallion for considerably less than she had budgeted. "That was fortunate," she said as they completed the transaction. "I was sure he would go for at least twice that amount." Mitch seemed equally puzzled. "Strange," he agreed, "but sometimes luck favors the prepared." With the stallion whom Hope named Midnight and a promising young mare added to her stock, the auction was a resounding success. They arranged for the horses to be delivered to Silverdale the following week, not wanting to rush the journey back with new animals unfamiliar with them. They stayed that night in Tucson's finest hotel, a luxury Hope justified as a celebration of her successful purchases. After a proper dinner in the hotel restaurant, their first truly formal meal together, they stood in the hallway between their rooms, reluctant to part. "Thank you for your guidance today," Hope said, her hand resting on Mitch's chest. "I wouldn't have known what to look for without you." You give me too much credit, Mitch replied, his hands settling at her waist. You have a good eye for horseflesh naturally. Hope smiled up at him. Perhaps, but I value your opinion nonetheless. Mitch's expression grew more serious as he gazed down at her. Hope, he said quietly, these past months have been the happiest I can remember since before the war. Hope's heart swelled at his words. For me as well, she admitted. Despite everything my father's death, the challenges of starting over, I've found joy I never expected. Mitch's hands tightened slightly at her waist. I don't want to presume, he began, and I know it might seem hasty to some. Hope pressed a finger to his lips, stopping him. If you're about to say what I think you are, she said softly, then ask me properly tomorrow when we're back on our own land, not in a hotel hallway, no matter how fine the establishment. Relief and amusement crossed Mitch's face. Is that a suggestion or an order, Miss Noland? Consider it a strong preference, Mr. Morgan, Hope replied with a smile. He laughed quietly, pulling her closer for a kiss that held both promise and restraint. As the lady wishes, he murmured against her lips. They returned to Silverdale the next day, the journey passing quickly with shared anticipation of what awaited them. As they approached Pleasant Valley in the late afternoon, Hope felt a surge of emotion at the sight of her home, their home, perhaps, if the conversation she anticipated went as she hoped. Something's wrong, Mitch said suddenly, reining in his horse. Hope followed his gaze and felt her heart sink. The cabin door stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Stay here, Mitch ordered, drawing his revolver as he dismounted. No, Hope replied firmly, dismounting as well. It's my home. Mitch looked like he wanted to argue but nodded tersely. Stay behind me, they approached cautiously. As they drew closer, the extent of the damage became clear. The cabin had been ransacked, furniture overturned, Hope's few possessions scattered. Someone had clearly been searching for valuables. The horses, Hope gasped, suddenly remembering her most valuable assets. They hurried to the corral to find it empty, the gate hanging open. All three of Hope's horses were gone. No, she whispered, gripping the corral fence for support. Everything she had worked for, everything she had built, taken in a single afternoon. Mitch's expression had hardened into something dangerous. The rustlers, he said grimly, same ones who have been hitting the smaller ranches. Hope felt numb as she surveyed the damage. All my savings were in those horses, she said quietly, everything I had left after buying the land. Mitch took her by the shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. We'll find them, he promised, your horses and the men who took them. Hope wanted to believe him, but despair was settling heavy in her chest. How? First we alert the sheriff, Mitch said decisively, then we track them. They can't have gone far with 3 horses that aren't used to them. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Mitch rode to town to inform Sheriff Wilson while Hope did her best to restore order to the cabin. When he returned with the sheriff and 2 deputies, they immediately began searching for tracks. 3 men, the sheriff confirmed after examining the ground around the corral. Same boot prints we found at the Peterson place and the others. They're getting bolder, hitting places closer to town. Can you track them? Hope asked, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. We'll try, Wilson promised. But they've been clever so far, sticking to rocky ground when they can, makes tracking difficult. Mitch had been examining the area more widely. They headed south initially, he reported. Probably trying to make us think they're headed for the border, but there's a false trail here. 1 horse was led off separately toward the east. The sheriff looked impressed. Good eye, Morgan, you want to ride with us? Yes, Mitch said without hesitation. He turned to Hope. Will you be all right here alone? Hope straightened her shoulders. I'll be fine. Find my horses, Mitch. He nodded, his expression grave but determined. Lock the doors, keep the rifle handy. After they departed, Hope finished restoring the cabin as best she could. The thieves had taken little beyond the horses. She had no money or jewelry worth stealing, but they had left chaos in their wake. As she worked, her initial shock gave way to anger. This was her home, her dream. She refused to let thieves destroy what she had built. Night fell, and Mitch and the search party had not returned. Hope kept a lamp burning in the window, both as a beacon for their return and to deter any further unwelcome visitors. Sleep was impossible. She sat in a chair facing the door, rifle across her lap, waiting. Dawn was breaking when she heard approaching riders. Heart pounding, Hope moved to the window, rifle ready. Relief flooded her when she recognized Mitch in the lead, followed by the sheriff and deputies. And behind them her horses, all three looking tired but unharmed. Hope rushed outside, barely waiting for the riders to dismount before throwing her arms around Mitch. "You found them," she breathed, too overcome for more words. "Found them and the thieves," the sheriff confirmed grimly. "Caught up to them trying to cross the river south of here. They won't be troubling anyone again." Hope pulled back to look at Mitch, noticing for the first time the dirt and exhaustion on his face and a dark stain on his sleeve that looked suspiciously like blood. "You're hurt," she said, alarmed. "It's nothing," Mitch assured her, though he winced when she touched his arm. "Just a graze. One of them got off a shot before we subdued them." The sheriff and deputies departed after securing the horses in the corral, promising to return later for formal statements. Once they were alone, Hope insisted on tending to Mitch's wound, which proved to be minor but still concerning. "You could have been killed," she said as she cleaned the shallow gash on his upper arm. "Wasn't going to let them get away with your horses," Mitch replied simply. "Not after everything you've built here." Hope's hands stilled as emotion welled up in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Once his wound was bandaged, Mitch took Hope's hands in his. Despite his exhaustion, his eyes were clear and determined. "I had planned a more romantic setting for this," he said with a wry smile, "but recent events have only confirmed what I already knew." He took a deep breath. "Hope Noland, I love you. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Joy surged through Hope, momentarily eclipsing the trauma of the past day. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll have you, Mitchell Morgan." He kissed her then, a kiss that held promise, relief, and a future neither could have imagined when they first met on that cliff edge. "I'll never let go," he murmured against her lips, echoing his promise from that first day. "Not ever." 1 year later, Pleasant Valley had transformed. The small cabin had been expanded into a proper home. The corral had grown to accommodate a dozen horses, with more pasture cleared for the growing herd. A new barn stood near the original stable, and a bunkhouse had been constructed for the 2 ranch hands they now employed. Hope stood on the porch, watching as Mitch worked with their newest acquisition, a spirited 2-year-old stallion recently purchased from a breeder in California. Her hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, evidence of the newest member of the Morgan family expected to arrive in the winter. Their wedding had been a simple affair in the Silverdale Church, attended by nearly everyone in the community. Miller had given Mitch a generous wedding gift, a partnership stake in the eastern section of his ranch, which conveniently bordered Pleasant Valley. Together, they were building something larger than either had dreamed alone. "He's settling well," Mitch called as he led the stallion in a circle, "going to sire some fine foals." Hope smiled, thinking of how far they had come since that day on the cliff edge. "Just like his owner," she called back, earning a rare full laugh from her husband. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they maintained no matter how busy life became, Mitch placed his hand over hers on her belly. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Completely," Hope replied, leaning into his embrace. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Mitch answered honestly. "When I reached down that cliff edge, I had no idea I was reaching for my future." Hope turned her face up to his. "I'm glad you kept your promise," she said softly. "To never let go." "Easiest promise I ever made," Mitch replied, kissing her gently, "and the one I intend to keep the longest." As darkness fell over Pleasant Valley, they remained on the porch, talking of the future, the child they would welcome, the horses they would breed, the life they would continue building together. From near tragedy on a cliffside path had grown a love and partnership stronger than either could have imagined, a foundation as solid as the land they now shared. "I'll never let go," Mitch had promised that day, and he never did.